speak?
I don't know.
Well, we're just going to make it happen, Dr. Sloka.
Oh, I see.
I'm Mark Shafer from the Carnegie Historical Museum. Today is January 14th, 2001, and we have a distinguished panel here of Parsons professors.
Most distinguished.
Most distinguished. Who are going to reminisce about the Parsons days in general, but if they have specific memories of Dr. Millard Roberts, we're certainly going to include those because he was a very colorful man. I'll tell you what, let's hold Dr. Roberts up there for a minute so everybody can see what he looked like. This is Millard G. Roberts, who, when did he first come to the campus?
55.
1955 until an unceremonious retirement at what year?
It was about 67.
67.
Something like that. He was a man of controversial ideas. Many of the things that he implemented in those days have become standard procedure in colleges and universities throughout the nation. You know, tutoring systems and so forth. But he was a man of vision and controversy, and it will be interesting to hear what you folks have memories of concerning him. Dr. Tree, you want to hold up your show and tell here?
All right.
And introduce yourself and show us where you are. And these are Pyrus. These are the Parsons yearbooks.
Now, I'm Bob Tree, and I'm right down here, this young-looking fellow, out in the corner of this picture. I arrived on campus a couple of months after Dr. Roberts did. His tenure began, I think, officially about July 1, 55, and I arrived September 1 of 55 for a faculty meeting and to get the year underway. I was a brand new instructor, and this was really my first full-time teaching assignment. And I will always remember our first faculty workshop that was held there before the beginning of the semester down at the shelter house at Lacey-Keosauqua Park. Oh. And a very rustic kind of environment, and got us away from Fairfield and the campus and so forth. Well, things proceeded very nicely in the morning, with one exception perhaps. Somebody had, because the early morning had been rather chilly, somebody had started a fire in the fireplace, which felt rather good when we all arrived. But as the day went on and the day got warmer and warmer, there was less need for that fire. Well, at lunchtime, we broke and went over to the Hotel Manning. And they had set up two big tables in the lobby of the hotel and proceeded to serve us a good Iowa Thrashers dinner with platters and platters of fried chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes and gravy and tomatoes and cucumbers and all the rest. Well, it was just a marvelous feast. But imagine, if you will, what happened to everybody, including Dr. Roberts, when we all got back to the shelter house. And by that time it had warmed up, but good in there. And you know, all of us, even Dr. Roberts, who was presiding over some of the things in the afternoon, were dozing. It was an interesting introduction. And things went booming along from there. So that's my comment about arriving.
All right.
And I did come right at the beginning, almost the beginning of his administration, and was here through the entire period of it.
All right. Well,
not the only one.
Let's pass the book on to our next distinguished guest.
How about doing this in order of...
Oh, that's good.
He was the oldest.
All right.
No, Vera was already here.
Vera was already here, but Vera can talk next. And I'm the youngest. Not in years, but in time at Parsons.
What you going to say next, Ben?
No, you go.
Okay.
You're next.
Let me speak, because I have a lot to say.
Don't take too long.
I'm going to put a time on myself here.
Pat, here, you show the picture. I don't have a good picture of you, but I've got a
That's
picture.
all right.
All right.
That's all right. I look different anyway. Tying into what Bob said, actually, people don't realize that what took place there, in a way, was a kind of an educational miracle. Let me give you these statistics. Before Roberts came here, there were, close to what it is now, 28 colleges and universities in Iowa. Parsons ranked 28th. There were 41 Presbyterian church-related colleges in the country. Parsons ranked 41st. He came here that first year, and my guess was that the student enrollment was approximately what it had been over the years. May have been down a little during World War II, between 200 and 300. When I got there in '57, that's 2 years later, I had nothing to do with the enrollment then, but we went over 600. Most we had in the history of the college, over 600. And well, in course of time, as some of you may remember, the enrollment went over 5,000 here at Parsons, plus the fact that Roberts had started satellite colleges. There was one at Denison, there was one over in Beatrice, Nebraska, there was one down in the Southwest. Now, these one up in Albert Lee too. Bill Demeester went up there. And Roberts, of course, profited from these too, because he was getting a $500 a month retainer on these. But that was done with a variety of things. Enrollment, of course, was one big thing, and there were a variety of things done to increase enrollment. One of the things, of course, was that we came up with this nice term for people that had trouble going to college, marginal students. That was a very good term for students who had a high school graduation diploma, but were at that time, in some circles, not thought to be suitable for college. The only thing I would add to this is that things changed in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and since that time, the colleges changed from what they were. Before World War II, they were all like Parsons. Every person that would pay his way and had a high school diploma could go to college. In fact, my favorite quotation is the quotation of the director of admissions at Amherst College, which is a very select liberal arts college up there in New England. And the quotation I like to recite is this one. He said, "Before World War II, every high school graduate could get into Harvard if he put the dollar on the barrelhead." That's the way admissions was done before World War II and the GI Bill and more students that they could handle and crowded, and then everybody wanted to go to this school and that, and then they say, oh, we're selective, we're all this and that. But they were all really basically like Parsons, and they still are, many of them, trying to build enrollment. So there was nothing to be ashamed about that, though a lot of people made us feel a little bit ashamed. Well, I'd like to say a few other things on that, but I don't want to crowd the time.
Now, did you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm
for our viewers
Charles
that don't know
Sloka,
you.
who came here as dean of the college, and I served for 7 years until I became a scapegoat in a way. They had to blame somebody for our losing certification, accreditation there, and I remember we had a faculty revolt and this faculty group wrote a variety of things, some distortions, some lies, some truths, to North Central. And the answer was Charlie couldn't take care of the faculty. He couldn't control the faculty, and so I was expendable. They brought in a vice president for academic affairs, and in due time I was squeezed out. But I still think that if they hadn't axed Roberts, as they did, we'd have had a whole different history of what we have north of town. But I'll elaborate on that if anybody wants to know anything, but let some of the others speak.
I'm Vera Young, and I graduated from Parsons and came back to teach in 1947. So I was here from that time until the college closed in 1973. I brought this little book that they used as a promotion, Scholars Who Teach, because Dr. Roberts said that at this college, the professors taught classes. They didn't just do research, they taught classes. So my picture's in here, so I'll show you a picture of me in my younger days there. I also found, when I was looking for things, that I had this little booklet that's called In Memoriam to Lewis Baldwin Parsons. I had never seen it before, never read about it, and General Lewis B. Parsons actually didn't put up the money for Parsons. It was his father who left the money to start a college. So that's what this book is about. I took some notes because I wanted to make some points. We welcomed Dr. Roberts and his family with a lot of fanfare, with a big reception, and everybody was really ready to have him come and be the president. And some of these things are not connected, but many times he hired two people for the same job, as Charlie's saying here. That was his way of getting rid of somebody that he wanted rid of. He hired two people, and then one of them finally resigned, two people. He offered professors twice what they would have come for. But,
yeah, it's in later years.
Yeah, well, we didn't get the big salaries. None of us did. But
those were in Ben's days.
Yeah, he offered them twice the amount so that they would come. They wanted to come because they thought they would come to this little college and they'd be able to do read their scientific journals, and so that's why they wanted to come. But if they said they come for $10,000, he offered them $20,000. So that's just an example. One of the things he wanted to start, but he never got this started, he wanted the audience to stand up when he walked in. Like the President of the United States, but he never got that accomplished. He spoke to a lot of groups in Fairfield. He spoke to a lot of schools, many places in the country, and they said a lot of times he insulted them about their children, and they ended up sending their children to Parsons College. So he was really persuasive. That kind of person. Mrs. Roberts was an excellent teacher. She would take the lowest group in English that maybe nobody else wanted, and they loved her. And they said if you dropped your pencil that you missed 2 pages of notes with Mrs. Roberts. She really was an excellent teacher. So we really did get 2 for the price of 1, I guess. It was rumored that the top administrators, when they had their lights on at night, couldn't turn their lights out until they saw Dr. Roberts had turned his light out, in his office, because they didn't dare go home until he went home.
Just a footnote to that. When he had certain things he wanted done, he would have these very late night meetings. It would start about midnight, and he would take up a variety of things until most everyone was tired, and then he would introduce that which he wanted to be taken up, And everybody said, yes, yeah, and we were anxious to get going. But he had a variety of different techniques, demonic in a way. But to give the devil his due. I mean, he was a miracle worker here at Parsons, that's it.
He bragged they only needed 6 hours of sleep and nobody needed more than that, and that's all that he got. Any more than that was a waste of time. He also bragged that 90% of his faculty were PhDs. That's why most of the time he didn't even want to list me. I mean, I had a master's degree, but didn't want to list those people at all, because then he could brag, and Ben, you ought to read off that list. I mean, tremendous qualifications that faculty had, that came. But we weren't too bad either, but he didn't, kind of ignored us. You go ahead now, Ben.
I'm Ben Rogers. My picture's right there, pointing at something on the map. I think the photographer probably said point at the map. I don't know. I seem to be pointing at Vienna. I don't know why.
You're not sure.
I'm not sure.
What year did you come then?
I came in 1966 with the last big class. The class of 1966 were the people that came for the high pay. Not just for the high pay, because Dr. Roberts was a fabulous public relations man. And he got Parsons on the front street of the Wall Street Journal. Two beautiful big articles about how this college, without aid from the federal government and without asking the alumni for money, was actually in the black and was getting increasing numbers of students. In Time magazine, it showed that the faculty salaries at Parsons were third highest in the country. I think it was Harvard and Chicago that had higher than Parsons. And anybody that read that stuff thought, well, that wouldn't be a bad place to be. I was a dean of State University and the State University in Florida Atlantic University. And they paid me more to come here for 2 trimesters than I was making for a whole year. Deans don't get, as Robert knows, deans don't get the summer, and Charlie too, the summer off. And I could make more money at Parsons minding my own business and teaching students, which is what I really love to do. So I thought, golly, being a dean is a big pain. Teaching students is fun. I get more money for doing it. It's a nice place. So I came. And I wasn't the only one that year of 1966. That was, there were about 50 or 60 faculty members, mostly senior faculty members. Dr. Roberts hired senior faculty members. Most people hire people who have just completed their degree. If they want a PhD, they hire somebody that just finished his degree and pay him a low salary. Dr. Roberts hired people that had finished their degrees 10, 15, 20 years ago, and were senior. Like I was a dean, people were senior professors here, there, and the other place, and he paid them more than they were making where they were. Now, Dr. Roberts didn't actually do the hiring in 1966. Bill Munson and Jack Brown did the hiring. But because Dr. Roberts was too busy with his public relations. He was going around the country, and you see him on the, here's the school you're going to, or you're thinking about going to. You see the guy on there with Merv Griffin or somebody like that on the television. You think, boy, that would be a neat place. He was a good salesman. He gave it a good build-up. And it's true that a school which runs an economical program that is only a few courses with big classes, can make money. It's true, you can do that. And Dr. Roberts was claiming that he was doing it. Actually, he wasn't doing it. But he was claiming that he was doing it. And he was telling all these presidents of all these other colleges and universities, you don't need money from the government. You don't need money from your alumni. Get it out of tuition. You can imagine how popular he was with college presidents and with
He was hated.
No, he said he was
hated throughout the country by all these administrations, including people in the North Central Association.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
He also was telling the trustees of those other colleges, they don't need your money.
Yeah.
And trustees normally think that's why they're trustees, is they're supposed to contribute.
So that, anyway, lots of us came in that year. In history, Tom Duffy was a full professor, Ed Blackburn, others. George English came in that year, Bob Coots, Roman Zerwinski, Ben Collins, Bob Charles, all of them full professors, all of them. And I could keep on. In biology, less, well, anyway, a lot of people came, 50 or 60, and they came at high rank, and you can imagine what how much that cost. Now, it wasn't just that he gave the high salaries, but when you came up here, they also told you you get to belong to the country club free. The college picks up your country club. That's a pretty good thing. Where can you go and have the college pick up your country club so you can go out and eat and play golf and all that for zero? You couldn't eat for zero, but you could do, you didn't have to pay dues. Also, the college owned lots in the most desirable sections of town. And you could buy a college lot, and you did not have to pay for it until you had paid for the house. And you could use the lot as a down payment for the builder to build the house. And there was no interest on the loan from the college. So that's an incentive. Also, they had maps of the southern part of town, out south of town, that showed houses and showed lakes and showed a golf course. This was not there, of course, there was farmland. But this was the future projection. And if you didn't like your house that was in town, then as soon as they got this development done, you could, of course, easily sell your house in town because the lot hadn't cost you anything. And you could get one of these out of town, and you wouldn't have to pay for that lot either. And you'd live on the golf course, and that would be a Parsons community, just like Vedic City. Also, you got to send your children to school, to college, not just Parsons College, but any college of your choice. And Parsons would pick up the tab. Now, there wasn't anybody in the country that was offering stuff like that. So it's easy to see why he had no difficulty attracting senior faculty from established institutions. And they all came at once, and as they came the tragedy. The same identical year. We all got here in September, first set of classes in September, and that spring, the Northern Association, whatever it is, North Central Association, disaccredited the institution. Now, the time before when they had done it, they just put them on probation, and they got off probation, and they thought they're all set. But the North Central Association was an establishment, and Roberts was against establishments. And he actually had a high enough opinion of his own abilities that, in my opinion, he wanted to wreck the North Central Association. He believed that he could go his way, do it his way, and if the North Central Association disaccredited him, he'd take him to court and he'd beat him. He never got the chance to try, because after he was disaccredited, after we were disaccredited, they terminated him. I have a feeling that if he'd been on the stand in Chicago instead of Bill Munson, who was a rather quiet person and certainly no public relations man, that if Dr. Roberts had been on the stand, I'd have liked to seen him against that crazy old judge. I think he would have, I don't know what he would have done, but he would have done better than Bill Munson, that's for damn
Well, it
sure.
would have been a very interesting session.
Yes, it sure would have. And the North, it's conceivable that he would have won. I doubt it, but it's conceivable. He was going to beat that establishment.
Do you
He
know
was
the
going to make the
inside?
others be like him.
Do you know the inside of how the trustees fired him? At
No.
one time, while I was still part of the administration, Roberts was conscious all the time of the antagonism that was generated in amongst trustees, especially the local trustees.
Yeah.
And he managed to get a change in the Articles of Incorporation at one time. And we had about, the trustees were made up of about 40. And he had an article change whereby it said they would require 3/4 of the number of trustees to vote on any firing policy. Well, we never even got 3/4 of the trustees to come to a meeting. And I remember after that trustee meeting, he said, "Charlie, I got it fixed. They'll never get me now. They'll never get me now." Well, that period when you said here, when the problem was arising in '67, and it looked like they were going to take a vote on his firing. And I know they had New York reporters, TV people, and everyone down there. And sure enough, they voted, and they didn't vote it. They didn't dismiss him. But here was the thing that happened. A standard action taken at all trustee meetings was this. At the end of the meeting, someone would make a motion. I move that all powers of the board be transferred over to the executive committee until the next meeting. And somebody said, I second it. Yeah, it's just a routine matter so that the executive committee could act between trustee meetings. And that was done that particular meeting. Now that executive committee, that like rump group, they met and said, hey, we've got all the power of the trustees right now in our hands. They decided to fire him. That's what happened. But they primed the media first. They wouldn't give and they fired him, even though it was technically contrary to the Articles of Incorporation. And that summer, I kept arguing they had no right to fire him. It was against this. It was not there. And eventually, they did have a rump meeting in which they made legal that illegal operation. But in the meantime, they kept Roberts off campus because he said, I had written to him, I said, well, you come on back to the campus anyway. I knew it would be an embarrassment. you got a professorship in religion. If you're no longer president, come on down to the campus. And he was ready to come that summer, but they forbid his coming to the campus. But that was the background of how they got rid of him. And of course, there were a good number of professors who thought they could run things better. And they could. They ran it right to the ground. And that was what happened. But it was too bad. But this school was made for a promoter and not for a professor. All professors think they can run things. I used to think so, but it's not so easy when you're in an operation like Parsons.
What Charlie just said reminds me of the business of the disaccreditation. The committee, the accrediting committee from the North Central Association came to the campus and found nothing wrong with the campus. Pretty hard to find something wrong with the faculty when you've just added 50 or 60 senior professors all the way from Alaska to Florida, and in every place in between. But they found that the college was perfectly okay. They asked for a couple of minor changes. They always do, those accrediting committees. And then they reported this to the executive committee of the North Central, or whatever committee it is of the North Central that deals with it, with a recommendation that accreditation be continued for Parsons. And the committee, the Central Committee, and I knew the fellow who was chairman of it, was from the Michigan State University, hated Roberts. And that committee recommended to the full body against the finding of their subordinate committee that had come and visited us. Now, the only time, I don't know about North Central Association because I've never been to one of their meetings, but I've been to plenty of the Southern Association, and I imagine they run the same way. The only time the full body of the association gets together to act on recommendations is Saturday morning. And that's the only thing that's done Saturday morning, and then the people go home. Well, 95% of the people that are at the meeting have gone home on Friday. Why stay around for this? It's just pro forma, because these people make their recommendations, and it's aye. Now, if you are an interested party, which Parsons certainly was, it's only sensible to be there Saturday morning. Because all you have to do is stick up your hand on Saturday morning and say, I move it be placed on the table till next year. And everybody says aye, because God, they don't want to argue about anything Saturday morning. You know that. So that generally it's pro forma. It's just blah, 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 because there is nobody interested. But if you have an interest, I've been at a meeting where the college I was at had an interest, then you stay on Saturday morning. We stayed on Saturday morning, and we heard them recommend for us plus on that one. But so Dr. Roberts and Bill Munson, I don't know who else was at this North Central meeting, and Dr. Roberts said, I'm going home on Friday. And Bill said, well, do you want me to stay for the meeting? He said, no. Go on about your business. And whoever else was there, the same thing. In other words, Dr. Roberts purposely wasn't there Saturday morning when the action was taken. And the action was, it was pro forma. The super committee recommended Parsons lose its accreditation. Everybody was wanting to go home. They said aye, and out the door they went. And And of course, this was tragedy for all of the people at Parsons, but a special tragedy for those who had come for 1 year with all these high expectations. My contract, I still have it someplace, I think, has not only that year and tenure, that is until I'm 65 years old, which is passed a long time ago, but $1,000 a year raise for the first 5 years. It's written right in the contract, the amount you get every year. Boy, it just looked like it was solid. And everybody else got those same things, I'm sure.
I always
So-
thought that that Robert's theory of funding, he always was on the lookout how to get new money. He didn't worry about how to pay the old. And he would always be able to find some bigger lender that would allow one bigger insurance company or whatnot to provide a larger increase in which he could reduce and pay off some smaller loan that we had and then move on up. So that the end result was that we were, I don't know, 20 million in debt. When Bob, you were closer to the actual debt figures at that time. Am I
Yeah.
exaggerating?
No, you're not exaggerating. That's approximately the amount. That's a good round figure. I was going to add one thing to what you were saying, and that is that it was also predicated on enrollment. That the budget was predicated on enrollment. And as long as the enrollment increased each semester, things seemed to go along quite well. But I'm sure we all remember, I know Vera would remember, Charlie, you'd remember, that if we didn't quite make those enrollment projections, suddenly it was difficult to even find a paperclip. Because things were tight all of a sudden, and this largesse that we all got kind of accustomed to suddenly would come to a screeching halt. And then, if next semester the admissions people had rounded up some more strays and got them enrolled and the money was on the line, then suddenly paper clips became available and the payments were made. So you also had that it was always, as long as the college kept growing in numbers, the budget could be met, payments could be met, creditors rather, were happy because they were being paid, and things would go along quite well.
The government called it deficit spending.
Yes, or in a court case back in the 20s, it was also referred to as the Ponzi scheme. And that's essentially what it was. That as new money came in, you paid off old debts, and then you worried about paying the newer ones next year. And again, and the thing too that made this work so well during the 60s, when you had ever increasing enrollments, and you had a draft instituted, and you had Vietnam, and you had increasing numbers of students, especially male students, who were seeking to avoid going to Vietnam for understandable reasons. And I knew perfectly well, all of us did, that looking out at our classes, and we see an awful lot of students there who could care less about being in our classroom or anybody's classroom, but it was better than being in Vietnam. And so you had this, and this was happening all over the country. Colleges were growing rapidly in this period, and a lot of it was just simply a form of draft dodging. And the end result was that you kept growing. But 1965, 6, 7, we're beginning to come to the end of that, and some of you will remember the famous, or the infamous perhaps, Life magazine photograph. And I remember Charles Barnett telling me, and he was director of admissions at the time and had been director for a number of years. He said he never saw anything happen so fast in his life as suddenly after that photograph, the shut-off on applications, and then the letters started coming in wanting their money back, that they were withdrawing their application, and so forth. But that photograph had a powerful
Well, the story
impact.
too, it said Flunk Out U.
Yes.
That
And of course, I think we might pursue that particular question.
That was post-Roberts though,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was that the photograph that said the proof is in your profit? It was
Yeah,
on the grain
right.
elevator in the distance?
Some brief.
Yeah.
Well, the photograph I'm thinking of in particular shows all of these male students in sweatshirts,
Belonging to
reading
other
Harvard,
colleges.
Yale, Amherst, Iowa, so on.
Yeah.
And George Jordan III told me that if his father could have gotten through the telephone, he was one strangled student. His father was furious.
Was he in that photograph?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, my understanding, what I am told from some of the students, they were told by the photographer, we want a photograph of being representative of a college that gives a second chance. And so I suspect that probably a lot of them were kind of conned into posing for a photograph for one reason, but there was another agenda involved, which came out in the photograph. And the photographer and the reporter, they may have been on the up and up as far as what they wanted, but an editor back in New York may have seen a different possibility with a photograph.
Wasn't there something about swastikas too? Do we want to party, the atmosphere, you know, and there was this.
Well, there was, I think there was not in that particular photograph,
there was drinking.
but, and what college hasn't there been? But yeah, there was, that whole thing has got a roll of publicity going that really was very harmful, but I think it really had its roots in that particular Life magazine photograph. And then there was more. that came
Well,
after that.
Parsons used to do all they could to warp the media as well.
Oh, yes.
I brought this book along called Campus USA, Portrait of American Colleges in Action by David Boroff. And there are Parsons, Harvard, Wisconsin, Claremont, California, Sarah Lawrence, Swarthmore, University of Michigan, and we're in this. But it's an interesting thing. How did we get in? How did we get in? And this fellow, David Boroff, happened to be a friend of publishers who put out Better Homes and Gardens, that big Cedar Rapids, Des Moines.
Meredith Publishing.
Yeah, Meredith
Yeah.
Publishing. And the vice president, New Hughes, knew this person. And he said, David Boroff writes a lot and he's working on a book. And maybe we can get him down here. And what they did was they signed Boroff for $3,000 to come down to Parsons and to give a talk to the faculty and whatnot, and to examine the school and see all the different programs. And that's how we got into this book. But that was the background of it. And of course, it was a good plus for the school in that way.
One thing about the Life magazine article is it came out in the summer, late summer of 1966. That is when all of the people that came the same year I did had already been hired.
And your bags are packed.
I saw it on my way here.
Oh, no.
I saw the article. But it passed, you know. But if it had been the year before, they wouldn't have been able to find a lot of people who wanted to come.
The irony of that Life magazine article, but it never catches up on you, is a few years later, life itself flunked out.
Yes.
Yes.
It sank.
It sank before we did.
It sank, yeah.
I think that's one of the wonderful things about the whole business, is that in spite of the fact that in that year we not only lost the accreditation, but that we also lost almost all our student body, which was the only thing we had for producing cash. And that somehow or other, that school kept going until 1973.
Kept borrowing, but
That's all right, but it kept functioning. To take a school, to take a business, which this was presumably a business rather than an educational institution, it was primarily a business. To take a business and take away 60% of its income like that, and have it keep on functioning for 6 or 7 years, that's fabulous.
I remember
And somehow we did it.
I remember a necktie. I was taking summer classes. I graduated from Iowa, but I did my student teaching through Parsons. And Dr. Rogers was wearing a necktie with clipper ships on it. And whenever you ran into somebody, you'd point to your tie and you'd say, "Don't give up the ship." I always remember that.
I remember Mark was one like lots of kids who wanted to be certified in the schools, and they didn't have any American history. And the state requires anybody, whatever you're going to teach, to have 2 hours of American history, or at least it did then. And so he said, "What do we do about 2 hours of American history?" I said, "Well, I can remember what Mark and I did is I had a book, Oliver Larkin, Art and Life in America, real good book. I'd read it, I was done with it as far as I was concerned. And I gave it to Mark. I don't know if I got it back. If I did, I gave it to somebody else because they don't have it anymore.
I don't have it.
Okay, somebody else has it. But I tried to arrange something, not to make them take a course. It's silly to try to make somebody take a course for 2 hours in American history. Might as well give him something that he enjoys doing, like reading a book, and give him a grade. I didn't give him a grade. I think
I think I wrote a little paper or something.
What?
I think I wrote a little paper or something.
Yes, I'm sure you did. You did something.
Yeah.
You wrote a paper, and I think we met and talked about it. But that's a long time ago. Anyway, it got him his 2 credits in American history.
My last contact with Dr. Roberts came the night before the college died. Remember the bankruptcy court had put a burden on it. They had to come up with $200,000 of new money in 10 days. Bankruptcy judge himself was in favor of closing. He told me some colleges would be better off if they were just closed, and he really should have not been sitting on that. But anyway, there was no way we could come up with $200,000, and they were going to have this last meeting, and everybody was there, and it was a kind of a weepy meeting and whatnot. But the night before, I called Dr. Roberts, and I asked him how it was and everything, and I said, I was going to propose the college asking him to come back. And he said, "Well, Charlie," he says, "you know this," he says, I never passed on the pay." He said, "Every month we made the payroll." His way of saying he could do the job. And I went to that meeting, and everybody was there, and I made the proposal, and it was almost as if, "You dare to do this?" And I think for 6 or 8 years, until memory faded, they almost thought, "What are you trying to do?" There was so much anti-Roberts by that time, in the community. It was almost as if this man, but that's my last contact with it. And I don't know, if I'd have known better, I would have kept my mouth shut. But I really, in my naivete, I thought, well, let's bring him back.
Well, since I'm almost older than anybody, I'm pre-Roberts.
Yeah, I know, you and
Gene, would you
Paul.
like to come up here and?
No.
I think
I think I can hear
Okay.
you.
Oh, my.
This is
I
Gene
just want to
Sells.
say two things. The people who were on the faculty pre-Roberts never got their salaries raised.
Oh, no, they never did.
They were never part of these wonderful salaries. I won't tell you what was Paul's highest because you won't believe me. And the second thing I want to say is that before Roberts, Parsons was a good school. And those of us who were there look back on those days with nostalgia.
Good.
There was also this injustice, because I'm thinking of Paul himself, because he was not a PhD,
No.
you see? And one of the ways in which Roberts juggled promotion, this was before your time, was to get a high percentage of PhDs on the faculty. And in one time, we ranked fourth. Harvard was first, I don't know, maybe Stanford second, MIT third, and Parsons fourth. But one of the things that Roberts did, he pushed people, if he could, who were non-PhDs, to give up their faculty rank for higher pay. This is the devil's work, really, for higher pay if they would do that. And I don't think Paul ever did that on that. And then all the rest of the people that were teaching, these people that were not PhDs, we call them teaching assistants or whatnot. Now, actually, universities do that too. I taught, after my master's degree, I was a graduate assistant for 3 years and a teaching fellow for 1 year until I got my PhD. Universities are doing this all the time, but I was doing instructor's work. Small schools, when they hire people later on, they give them rank. And when I left, Cornell, I was made an assistant professor. You know, no money much to say, but I got some rank out of it. But that's one reason why we had such a high percentage of PhDs. He was squeezing, I don't know what he may have done to you, Vera, on that, to try to squeeze you out, make you a teaching fellow, because you didn't have your PhD, you see.
I remember the Hickarders when they came. You remember he was in
Joe Hickard,
biology.
yeah.
And
I still get a Christmas card from him.
yeah, and his wife was a friend of mine. I didn't know Joe till he came here. And he said, I can't believe it. He said, I went to this meeting and I met Dr. Von Olen, and he said, I didn't realize there already was a head of the department. He brought Joe here to be the head of the department. And Joe was feeling really badly after he had met, Dr. Von Olen, that they had two people in the same job. Like I said, he did that a lot of times.
They do a lot of
That's what they did with us.
Yeah, do that with us, yeah.
Oh, there were distortions in the promotions. One of the interesting one was on retention. It's a policy in schools to, if you can retain your students, it's a sign that the student is doing well and the school does a good job on them. I mean, the best schools will have a retention, Princeton or whatnot, maybe 10, 15%. We in Parsons were selling, we have better retention policy than that. We would come up maybe with a 5% retention. And the parents, of course, it's great. And they, my goodness, this is wonderful. They don't lose students there. But the way we rated retention was this. If we brought in 400 students in the fall and 250 left at the end of the semester, but we brought in 225 more, you see. Well, we had lost practically no retention, you see. And that was the policy on retention. They always could claim, oh, the retention policy is great here at Parsons. We don't lose on the, in fact, we kept gaining all the time.
Yeah, Lee?
I've been thinking all,
Oh, Lee was one of
Yeah,
the
Lee,
trustees.
Why don't you come up here closer to the mic?
that's fine.
Okay.
I'm thinking all along, are we here to praise Caesar or bury him?
I think to do both.
When, before Millard Roberts was hired, everybody was saying whoever he becomes will be the last president of Parsons. That's how bad things were financially and with less than 300 students. And a local fellow by the name of McKee was a Fairfielder and a Parsons grad, and he was going to the Brick Presbyterian Church. And he's the one that discovered Millard Roberts. And I think back about that inauguration, there never was such pomp and ceremony, cars driving up and opening the doors, and you got out and the chauffeur took it away and parked it, and we Millard Roberts had hired a Kansas City promotional firm to do that. And,
Was that referred to as the Ascension? Okay.
It started out as the inauguration, it moved to the coronation, and finally to the ascension.
So, from the time of Millard Roberts here, to me, was the most exciting time to live in Fairfield, Iowa. And all the things that were grandeur, the summer festival,
Oh, that was pretty good.
the $1 million for a football team and send them to Hawaii. That's why we're had this sad meeting today. You know, all those things that couldn't afford, but everybody was impressed or enjoyed. The biggest financial promotion I ever remember, I don't know if it's true, but it's a great story, take it as it is. The bursar, now did you ever hear that bursar word before? That's a bookkeeper. He told Dr. Roberts, you have enough money to finish the summer, but we won't be able to open this fall. I don't know what year this is. He said, what do you mean we won't be able to? Well, we don't have the funds. So the next day, 2,000 telegrams went out of Fairfield, Iowa. Summer school was just over. Your son did not, your daughter did not achieve a 2-point. So in order to enroll next fall, they have to come to summer school. And many a fellow told me, he says, I drove up home in front of my convertible, in front of the house, got my suitcase out, Dad standing on the front porch, he says, stop. What do you mean, stop? You're going back. The hell I am going back. Dad explained to him, didn't make the grades. So all at once we had 2,000 kids back here in the summer, and we opened the next fall. Now, if that isn't miraculous fundraising in Western, I don't know how Western Union got 2,000 telegrams out here. Don't alter the story because it's too good to win.
Well, if that's not true, it's a good story. I never heard that story.
No, I never heard that one either.
You'd
Some
seen
of
it
the
too.
downfall, I remember Charlie Barnett, after one of his trips, came back and he says these community colleges are commissioned to make an inroad into enrollment. And Robert says, oh, forget it, don't bother, it'll never
You can
happen.
tell that he wasn't a teacher. He doesn't have an auditorium voice.
I went from,
We
the
can all
one
be
that really
really
invented Flunk Out U, I flunked out in 1936. A few checks later, became on the board of trustees. So, and one day I called up and asked if I could come and see Dr. Roberts, and the secretary said, just just come on out. So I forget what my plea was, but anyway, he told me, Lee, forget that damn sentimental dribble of yours. It doesn't mean anything to me. And go back uptown and get to work, and on the way stop at the Fairfield Glove Company and tell John Hunt and Jim Lanson the same thing I told you. He says, I never heard of your damn college town. And I came here and I've done more for it than anyone ever did, and all you do is stab me in the back. So, you know, you had to be 100%. I couldn't get enough of the man. I remember I ran all over town every time I heard he was going to give a speech, because if Clinton thinks he's good now, there's nothing to what Millard Roberts charged. And so if somebody could, I think Paul Sells or Tid Gunn told me if we could only got him stopped at $3,000 or 3,000 students, and he had a committee that he went to and said, I'm proposed to do this or that, and they told him yes or no, and he would abide by it. But I remember at one trustee meeting on Saturday, we voted down the airplane. On Monday morning it arrived. So that's the way things went. It was just completely out of control, and it's too bad we aren't going today, and if the man could have been controlled. And you know what? In that Parsons bubble, that green book, wrote that if Millard Roberts had been able to write a good check and tell the truth, he would have died a genius.
You know, Lee, when I was still on fairly innocent terms with Roberts in my first year, I remember driving back from some meeting with him, and because normally I don't think later on I would have asked him what his plans were for the future. He had me intimidated. But at that time I said, well, what are your plans? What are your plans here? Now, I had just been the new man on the team, and he says, well, I'll tell you, Charlie. He says, I plan to have a good record here, do things maybe about 5 years. I'll really be able to do something that will catch some notice back east. Then I want to get a job in some big university back there, maybe New York University, and do the same thing up there. He said, then I'm going into politics. That was what he told me, and of course, fame was part of his fame and riches. He made a lot of money here, and he bought that big estate up in New York, and he earned a lot of money while he was here. In fact, when he lost the job here, he went and bought a junior college there in Maryland and ran that for some time. But he made a lot of money here, more than the professors there, Ben.
That's for sure.
Wasn't his salary based on twice the highest faculty member?
Oh yeah, I think you were.
He set that price. So
yeah, they get that up, then he had a middle echelon, and then he was above all of that. Yeah.
See, that's why he could bring Ben in at such a high salary, was that his salary would be twice as much as Ben's.
Yeah, the vice president would be above them.
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
And then his.
Yeah.
Well, mine wasn't that good. But it was good. I think, I know that it was the case with me, that when they talked with me first, they talked quite a bit about the colleges that were growing up around the country, the Roberts colleges. And they said, you have experience in administration, and there's no end to the number of colleges we're going to have around the country. And we're stockpiling these people.
But the war ended.
We're stockpiling these people to move them out as administrators of these various colleges when the time comes. Well, I wasn't thinking of that. I wanted to come to Parsons, and I wanted to draw my salary here and all that kind of stuff. I was perfectly happy with staying here. But they did have that extra added push that if you didn't want to stay here and you were on the way up, you might get to be the president of some college in
Yeah, they
Nebraska
sent me out to Denison as a possible president out there, but I was too religious for them. I'd begun to be a Christian by then, and I allowed that to interfere. And they didn't
Didn't want any of that.
They didn't think I was the right person.
Well, we could go on forever, I think.
Yeah, we could get into his theology, but that's another subject.
No, and that's not why I'm jumping in, but we've gone for quite a bit longer than I guess I've anticipated.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great, but does anybody have any final anecdote they would like to share about this man?
I would like to say that Dr. Roberts is the only person I've ever known who was born on the same day I was. I thought that was going to be like witchery or something.
Put that on
It was
your
a good
epitaph,
sign.
then.
When I looked at Who's Who and I saw that, I thought that's a wonderful sign.
Various ones have heard this statement, but Mrs. Jennis summed it up. He was completely uninhibited by truth or ethics.
Thank
I
you.
think a reflection of the community's sorrow for the college. Farm Bureau had a picnic at Kenny and Beth Larson's. And they had a hayride, and there were ducks that the kids could watch. It was a family picnic. Everybody could let their hair down. They didn't have to dress up. I think everybody had a good time. And the faculty, yes. And they were there all afternoon. And Dr. Rudiger stood on the cistern platform and did magic tricks in the afternoon.
Well, Millard Roberts certainly brought some color to this community, and he's
With red.
what?
It was in the red.
In the red, yes. That scarlet, yeah, that scarlet red letter. Anyway,
Excuse me, one more.
Yeah,
thing.
Lee.
I forgot. The worst boast the man ever made was, 3 of my treasures have had a heart attack, but it hasn't affected me.
oh, dear. That was Lee Gobble. 3 of Millard Roberts' treasurers had had a heart attack, but it had never affected him. Does that sum the man up? I don't know. I only caught a glimpse of it a few times. I was just a kid then, but I remember him, something about, he was on the bandstand. It was the old bandstand in Central Park, probably in connection with one of the arts festivals. And who was the painting professor? Rios, Dr. Rios. Had a large painting that was being auctioned off, and Roberts said something that was scathingly funny, but it was also kind of a put down of the artwork. Something to do with nobody buying it, I think. But that's my memory of the man. I saw him a couple of times other than that, but boy, this has turned into a real rip snorter of a session. And I guess I had envisioned just going through the old yearbooks and memories being jogged, but that wasn't necessary at all. Thank you, Dr. Charles Sloka, and master's degree holder Vera Young, and Dr. Ben Rogers and Dr. Robert Tree. We really appreciate you helping us out here to bring back a man who made a big impression on the history of this town. So I'm Mark Shafer from the Carnegie Historical Museum. Come visit us once a month. We try to have programs up here, and thank you for watching FPAC.
Ben, I have a question on North Central. North Central